welcome to Smashterpieces, a casual walk through the history of the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate roster. My name is Joe.
And my name is Matt.
And if you're new here, what we are doing in the show is we are playing one game for every character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate from 1984's Duck Hunt to 2019's Fire Emblem Three Houses. And today's game is representing fighter number 8, Pikachu. It is the 1999 Nintendo 64 game, Pokémon Snap.
So once again, in case you missed our brief explanation at the end of the last episode, the reason that we're playing a bunch of Pokemon spin-off games is that, frankly, the main series Pokemon games are very similar. And there's a lot of Pokemon. Like, a lot of them.
I love Pokemon games. I love playing them. For a discussion podcast, the fact that we're playing like 5 regular Pokemon games, as it is already like, man, that's a lot of Pokemon, and adding any more onto that, unless we absolutely have to, like if a Gen 8 Pokemon gets added, we don't really have a fucking choice. Sword and Shield's going on there. But, like, if we can avoid it, generally, we're trying to be like, let's play one of the Pokemon spin-offs, because those are also, I think, very valuable. And I think most unique of all of them is Pokémon Snap.
Actually, while we're talking about spin-offs, since this is the first time we're really talking about Pokemon, how about we talk about how incredibly huge the Pokemon franchise was at this point in time?
Oh, you mean like the biggest thing on Earth, unavoidable for all people of any age?
Pretty much.
It is a brand presence that I don't think we have ever or will ever see any brand reach the same level again. Like, even Pokemon is no longer on that level.
I would say that the only thing that is as ubiquitous as Pokemon is Mickey Mouse, frankly.
And even then, like, even Mario's more ubiquitous than Mickey Mouse at this point.
I would not say that at all.
They're equal, I think. I think they're equal.
I don't agree, but okay.
Pikachu used to be the thing. Like, my great-grandmother knows what a Pikachu is.
Yeah.
I can't say that about any other video game or thing that I've ever enjoyed in my life that isn't, say, Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, no, it is, I would say that Pikachu is roughly as big a character as Mickey Mouse is. And it doesn't have quite the same legacy, and modern Pikachu stuff isn't as big as modern Mickey Mouse stuff, but that's how big Pokemon is and was. It is the single most lucrative, franchise ever made.
Yeah, it is still the highest grossing media franchise in the world. To this day.
Which is insane.
Yeah. Just for anybody that was not alive at that time, we were children during this time. We were growing up in what has been referred to in history as Pokémania, because that's essentially what, like, Pokemon was a phenomenon. Imagine how big Minecraft got when it came out, and then multiply that by, like, 50.
Yeah. So, and like, we grew up, with Pokemon in our formative years, and this is something that I have seen. It's like, obviously, when you're a kid, as your brain is growing with you, it's much easier to learn things. This is something like, it's much easier to learn languages. My cousin was actually taught French as his first language because he was going to naturally pick up English way easier as a kid than if he tried to learn French as a second language as an adult. That's a good idea, because that's just how your brain works. And because Pokemon existed in our formative years, there are studies that show that, like, people our age are likely to have a section of their brain dedicated to remembering, like, the first 200 or so Pokemon.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts. They were in every store, they were on every corner, they were on every network. News sites talked about them. The TCG was bigger than, it was actually at that time probably bigger and more well-known than Magic the Gathering? And this was pre-Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Did not exist yet. The games were selling like crazy. It was essentially the title, like, it's Pokemon and Tetris that made the Game Boy a success. Those are the two.
What I'm reading now is that the Japanese sales alone for Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue just in 1996 was 1.04 million units. Which, that's a lot for video games in the 90s, especially just in Japan.
Yeah, games didn't hit that number pretty much ever. So, this is all to say, not to go on for too long about it, Pokemon was a big deal in 1999.
Yes.
Everywhere.
And this was only 1 year after the American release. Red and Green were released in 1996 in Japan, but Red and Blue were released in 1998 in America.
Mm-hmm. We got the anime first as well.
I think it was at the same time, wasn't it?
I think we got the anime slightly before we got the games.
You might be right. I think like the games came out alongside episode 2 of the anime. Now I need to check this. Pokemon Red and Blue released in America on September 28th, 1998. And Pokemon I Choose You, episode 1 of the anime, released on September 8th, 1998. So yeah, the anime was a couple weeks early.
Yeah.
And actually since the show started syndicated, meaning it started, every weekday, 5 episodes a week, they actually were on episode 15 by the time that the game came out.
Damn. So they got a good head start on that.
And weirdly, I'm looking at this right now. Weirdly, the episode that came out on the same day as the games was shown a day before episode 1 as a quote-unquote sneak preview.
What episode was it?
That was Battle Aboard the St. Anne.
Huh. Interesting. But yeah, suffice it to say, Pokemon was huge. And Pokemon Snap is a game that many people our age seem to have, a very interesting memories of. Did you play a lot of Pokemon Snap as a kid? I don't remember if we asked this during the preview in the last episode.
I most certainly did. It was actually a game that, I didn't want to delete my save file when I was a kid. So I recognized that, as long as I just don't, save my new game, I can just play the entire game in one sitting. Yeah.
And we did both play the entire game in one sitting for this show. We both took about an hour and a half to 2 hours to 100% the game. It's not a very big game.
It's not, no.
It's incredibly small. And considering how sort of odd it is, that makes perfect sense. But I played it all the time as a kid as well. But from the sound of it, from talks we have had in the past, it doesn't sound like either of us ever, made use of one of the most interesting parts of this game, which was Blockbuster. Boy, that name feels like an ancient...
I've never been in a Blockbuster in my life. I'm gonna level with you. I've literally never been inside a Blockbuster.
There was a Blockbuster down the street. I live, literally, I can see where a Blockbuster used to be from where I currently live. It's a Pizza Hut now, funnily enough. It is not a Blockbuster anymore. Hasn't been in years. I think it's a Pizza Hut and an Einstein Brothers. They used to have these kiosks in Blockbuster where you could bring your cartridge, your Pokemon Snap cartridge in, and you could plug it in, and then you could print out stickers of the pictures that you took in Pokemon Snap. And I consistently forget that these existed, because again, I never used them.
I've never seen one.
I think I might have gotten Pokemon Snap after they stopped being a thing. I don't remember when exactly I would have gotten a hold of this cartridge.
I saw someone on Twitter. I don't know who it is. I think, but it's someone from one of the Nintendo sites nowadays, maybe Nintendo Wire or something like that. I don't remember who it was or what site they're from, but he actually has one of those machines somehow.
Jeez. I mean, I assume they're still floating around somewhere.
Yeah, and he said, the other day on Twitter, he posted a picture of, this old voucher that you could get in a magazine of, use this to get one printing free. And he said, if you show up at my door with this voucher, I will honor it.
Good. We should probably explain what the game is, because we haven't actually done that.
I was about to say, Pokemon Snap is low-key a rail shooter.
Not even low-key. It's a rail shooter where you don't shoot things.
Yeah. And you were right, by the way, when we talked about this on the pre-talk, in the previous episode. Pokemon Snap was originally a non-Pokemon game.
Yes. I'm actually looking at the history right now if you would like a rundown on that after. But let's explain what the game is first.
Right.
It is a game where you are Todd Snap, and you are brought to Pokemon Island, because names are hard, by Professor Oak, specifically the anime Professor Oak. This game is explicitly based on the anime versions of all of these characters. In fact, Todd Snap showed up in the anime to promote the release of Pokemon Snap.
Mm-hmm.
He was in like 3-4 episodes, but the main goal of the game is to get in this sort of autopilot car thing and take pictures of Pokemon as you pass them. That's the whole game. Some Pokemon are blocked behind you not having the items you need to get a good picture of them. For instance, at some point, you ride past a Kangaskhan who has his back to you, and you can take a picture of him, and it'll count as a picture of a Kangaskhan, but it's kind of a shitty picture, because you took a picture of this Kangaskhan with its back to you.
Yeah, Professor Oak won't like it.
Yeah. But later on, you will be given apples, or Pokemon food, because I guess apples are copyrighted or something. I don't fucking know. Why didn't they just call them apples? He will give you apples, and you can throw these apples to, say, lure Pokemon to certain spots, or just be a dick and hit them with an apple. And you can hit the Kangaskhan with this apple, and it'll get angry at you, and it'll turn around, and it'll start yelling at you, and you can get a much better picture that way. Or then later on, it'll give you a Pester Ball, in which it's like, hey, you know how you were like throwing apples at things because you're a jerk? Well, this item is explicitly that. It's filled with poison, and you're gonna throw it at things. And so you do.
They never say that it's poison, but there's a purple smoke that comes out of it.
That's a purple mist when it breaks. It's poison. And that's the only way to get a picture at all of a Snorlax, because in the very first level of the game, you ride past a Snorlax, and he is sleeping, but you can't see his head. So if you try to take a picture of it, the camera's just like, I don't know what this is, even though any child in 1999 could have told you exactly what it was, and you'd think Professor Oak would be able to make that distinction as well, but whatever.
I mean, you could also just play the Pokeflute.
Well, yeah, but you don't get the Pokeflute until way later, too, which also is a thing that makes it so that multiple things can happen. It's a really interesting game in terms of progression. And it's also 2 hours long and only features 63 of the 151 Pokemon that existed at the time. That's right, children. Did you know that at one point there were only 151 of them and not 900?
This didn't even have half.
Yeah, didn't even have half of them. It's a very small number.
And yet there's 5 different instances of Pikachu.
Yep. There's regular Pikachu, surfing Pikachu, running Pikachu,
flying Pikachu.
Flying Pikachu, that's true.
Pikachu on a log. Rolling Pikachu.
Was there a rolling Pikachu?
Pikachu on a ball.
All right, you could put Pikachu on a ball.
On Electrode, specifically.
This game was dumb. But that's the whole thing of the game. But it, like you said, like you pointed out, did not start as a Pokemon game.
And actually, before you get into this, I will say the episode of the anime with Todd Snap aired a full year before the game came out in Japan. But in America, it was just a couple months before the game.
Interesting. So it wasn't to promote it. Well, it might have been to promote the game, but it wasn't like simultaneous.
And actually, he was originally simply named Snap, not just Todd Snap. But then Kellogg's wasn't happy with that because they have their mascots Snap, Crackle, and Pop.
So stupid. Can you imagine how that would have gone today? Kellogg's would Kellogg's have even bothered? If anybody can stand up to Kellogg's lawyers, it's the fucking Pokemon company. That's like telling Disney, no, you can't name your character that, and Disney turning around and going, or what?
But yeah, the first run of the episode had the character named Snap, and he later became Todd.
Yeah. So, as most N64 games, in fact, I'm pretty sure we've said it for almost every 64 game we have covered outside of Mario 64, this game, unsurprisingly, started out as an N64 DD project. Because they all did. They all did! You can't look at a fucking 64 game and know, how did the 64 get any games?
Ocarina of Time didn't start as a 64 DD project.
Okay, it had one connected to it, but like,
yeah.
it almost sometimes feels like, how did the 64 get any games? They were all being made for something else, and then they became 64 games.
Well, also keep in mind, we're already talking about games in 1999, several years after the N64 was released, and we are only 2 years before the GameCube.
That's fair. That is fair. But yeah, it started as an N64 DD game based on Jack and the Beanstalk. And it wasn't about taking pictures. It was about planting seeds. And then or you might have taken pictures of what grew on the seeds. But for the most part, it was being made by HAL Laboratory. And it was a game about planting seeds and watching the things grow out of the seeds in real time using the N64 DD's built-in internal clock. By the way, you can also see the evidence of this because in the opening credits of Pokémon Snap, it says it was made by the Jack and Beans team. So they kept that name. But then they kind of realized that, so first of all, no footage of this exists. Footage of this game does not exist. Nobody knows what this game would have looked like. All we have is what people have told us. They announced the game was going to be made, but by the time it was ever shown, it had already made the switch to Pokemon.
I think some parts of it made it into Earthbound 64, which, as you know, was itself cancelled.
Yes. In fact, most of the reason why we know about Jack and Beans is because in 99, when Snap came out, Shigesato Itoi posted an article series about the original concept of the game, including an interview with Miyamoto about it, which this sounds entirely like Miyamoto's jam, that thing.
Pretty much. I guess that idea eventually became Pikmin in a way.
Potentially. But I guess in some interview with Satoru Iwata, he mainly said that it got switched over because they kind of realized that, like, nobody's going to want to take pictures of this. This game doesn't make any sense. Nobody's going to want to play this. And then Pokemon Red and Green came out and were the biggest successes in the history of anything. It was a giant phenomenon, and they looked at their game and they're like, this isn't going anywhere. Hey, what if we made it about taking pictures of Pokemon? And they did. It got scrapped from the DD, obviously, because the DD got scrapped, and it just became a regular 64 game, and the rest is history. Pokemon Snap came out.
And overall, there is very little overall to really say about the act of playing Pokemon Snap. To me, the appeal of this game is that it gives us it's sort of like going to the zoo in a way. You get to see Pokemon in a way that's just how they act in the wild, which is, number one, it was not something that we had ever seen in any way at the time, unless you count the anime. And number two, it's still just like the opportunity to just kind of enjoy seeing the Pokemon fully animated, because the animation in this game is actually really good.
Yeah, it's very obvious that most of this game's budget was spent on animation. Like, a large chunk of it, because, like, when you're in the menus, it's just, like, looping sprites, and in Oak's lab, Oak is just a 2D image that you're looking at. There's very little voice acting. But then you get out into the field, and, like, Pokemon are moving, they're emoting, they're interacting with each other. It's really cool, especially for a game from 1999.
Yeah. It's really, really cool to just, like, see how much work went into the animation and how lively the game is in a way that a lot of games aren't really about. You don't get to just like really just sit and observe things play out in a fully animated way in a lot of video games. And I think that's the core appeal of Pokémon Snap. And based on what we've seen of the sequel, it's looking like it's going to be just as well animated. At least that trailer that we saw was.
The sequel that was announced fucking 2 days after we recorded an episode where we joked about how it wasn't going to happen because it hadn't happened in 20 years.
It's like what I said about the Smash character. You just gotta bring it up, and then the universe will make it happen to spite you.
Apparently.
You don't need to avoid doing that kind of thing so that you don't have egg on your face. You do that thing so you make it happen.
Yeah, we summoned the new Pokémon Snap. You're welcome, Internet.
You're welcome.
But yeah, it's just, that game could potentially be fantastic, because if it's made with the same sort of philosophy as nothing else is important. What's important is how the Pokemon look and act, and that they're fun to interact with, even when you are not personally interacting with them, because you're not. You are not personally interacting with any of these Pokemon. You're just driving by and taking their picture.
Unless you're assaulting them.
Unless you're assaulting them, in which case...
Or like feeding them, I guess, but whatever.
I think it's also assault to feed them with those apples. Have you seen how fast that Pikachu puts down those apples? Like,
that's true.
They're just gone. And that can't be healthy. But yeah, there's not a lot to the gameplay of Pokemon Snap. It's just really interesting to see this side of Pokemon. And I think, well, it is still weird that this is the first Pokemon game that we're playing, one with no battles, no, like, walking around, none of the staples of what we now know as a Pokemon game. And this is the first one we're talking about in the series. I think this is actually weirdly fitting, because this is, more than anything else, a game about the Pokemon.
Yeah.
And nothing else.
I just think it's neat.
Yeah, it's a really neat game. And it's a game that I genuinely, until they announced it, it was one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, but that'll never happen again. Like, they'll never make another game like this ever again.
I still don't really understand why it is happening, to be frank.
I also am kind of confused as to why it's, like, happening. Granted, the Pokemon Company seems to be getting a lot more into spin-offs nowadays. They're shoving Pokemon into everything they can, so maybe it does make a little more sense than I'm giving it credit for. But for, like, 20 years, I essentially lived with the idea. I was 7 when this game came out. And and since then, I have basically, well, not since then, but like in my adult years, I've basically been operating under the assumption of like, but a game like this will never happen again. Why would it? This would be the most niche thing in the world.
Not even like that there's any particular reason that it wouldn't happen. There's just absolutely no reason that it would.
Yeah. There's no, I assume that Pokemon Snap was a success, but I'm gonna doubt it was a super huge runaway success.
Yeah, like, why now?
Hey, people, Pokemon pictures. I don't know. This game, by the way, I do personally feel that this game specifically launched a sort of mini genre that is not talked about very often, because there are now entire games where the goal is to go into an environment and take pictures of stuff. Like, think of Endless Ocean. Think of Africa. That kind of thing. And that genre never really took off because it didn't have Pokemon in it. But I would like to believe that Pokemon Snap was a big catalyst in those games, like inspiring those games being made. And obviously other parts, like an interest in biology and animal stuff, also probably played a part. But I personally like to believe that the existence of Pokemon Snap was at least a factor.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time talking about the idea of the game. Do we have anything in particular?
We described the gameplay. What else is there?
Not a lot, frankly. I could say, oh, the environments are cool, the Pokemon are neat to see. That's really just kind of restating, like, the idea of the game. Anything specific in particular is just kind of weird to talk about.
The way that Goldeen is in the game is stupid and way too easily missable, but that's, like, literally the only one.
Pretty much. I mean, to be frank, like, if we really sat down and genuinely talked about the game at length, we may end up with an episode that is longer than the amount of time that it took us to play the game.
I don't know if I'd be able to talk about Pokémon Snap for 2 hours.
I would only need to talk about it for like an hour, pretty much.
I like that it is essentially a puzzle game, alongside being a rail shooter, because, well, quote unquote puzzle, like, the puzzles are generally, what if you took Pikachu over to that egg and then played a song that made Pikachu so angry that it shocked the egg and hatched a Zapdos?
Yeah.
Puzzle solved.
What if you put this Slowpoke right here, so it got bit by a Shelder and evolved?
Or my favorite, what if you threw a Pester Ball into that crater and a Growlithe came out?
What if you took a picture of this Lapras, and then it took a picture of another Lapras, and then took a picture of another Lapras, and then finally, one fourth and final Lapras would appear close enough to you that Professor Oak doesn't yell at you for how it's so small?
What if you took a picture of all the Grimers in this spot so that another Grimer spawned in an area that you could throw things at to evolve into a Muck? By the way, he will not spawn unless you take a picture of those other Grimer.
What if you did the hellish series of events to get flying Pikachu?
It's just, there's a lot of that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I like it. It's just, there's only so much you could say about it before you're giving a strategy guide, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. And this game is small enough that we could legit give a strategy guide in the form of an audio podcast.
And it still wouldn't be anything close to our longest episode.
Yeah. So, yeah. And speaking of, like, there's really, honestly, not all that much to talk about. There's not a lot of soundtrack to talk about either. We both were talking about this before the episode, but we kind of both agreed that, like, the main song that deserves to be pointed out is Valley. And, like, Valley's a really cool song, and it's also one of the more interesting levels in the game, just in general.
But it's also, like, the only song that, like, really stands out of the 7 areas that you go to.
Yeah, there's, like, I like the Valley level in general because of the Magikarp stuff, even though that Magikarp stuff is kind of horse shit to get to launch correctly. But it's really fun. It's very neat and interesting and charming. But yeah, just, this is the only song. Like, I kind of like Volcano. But there's nothing else.
My favorite song since I was a kid has always been a song that neither of us saw on stream, Pokémon album. This is the song that plays in the album where you keep pictures that are not part of the Pokemon report. They're not scored by Professor Oak. Rather, you just kept them because you liked them. You wanted to keep those pictures.
Yeah, I happened to put one in of an Eevee that I really, really liked because the Eevee looked so smug and or high. It was a fun picture of an Eevee.
And also, I think the options music. It's more funky than an options menu deserves.
But something that neither of us knew until we sat down to record this episode, there are 2 credits themes in Pokemon Snap. There is one for when you haven't 100%ed the Pokemon report. And then there's one for when you have.
And I don't think either is particularly notable. I think that the first one is not very good, and the second one is just a low-key remix of Rainbow Cloud.
Which, speaking of Rainbow Cloud, hey, it's a bad final level.
Yes. It only makes sense in the context of 1999, where we low-key, like, Mew was this mythical status in real life, kind of. Where, like, people would argue over whether it existed, in a way.
But even then, even when I was a kid, I remember playing Rainbow Cloud and just being like, this level's boring. It's so boring, and it goes on for so long, and there's one Pokemon in the whole thing, and the method of getting Mew's picture isn't even that exciting, and it's not a good final level. And that's all I have to say about Pokemon Snap.
The second Pokeflute song was pretty dope. The one that goes do 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 do.
I'm not even gonna edit in the actual song. I'm just gonna leave that. That's the one. Also, yes, I agree. That's the highest tier Pokeflute. I just like to picture Todd jamming out in his car as he plays that, as a Pikachu gets so mad that this song is playing that it electrocutes an egg. So one of the things we wanted to do is this game does give a score, because it's a score attack game, except not really, because the score is built up as you play.
We could probably, like, kind of well, that's how scores work.
I mean, yeah.
But we could probably describe how the scoring system works, which I don't know how it works under the hood in the game's code. And I think the developers of the Dolphin emulator actually discovered how it works because, like, it didn't work in Dolphin for the longest time. And I don't know the details of that.
Huh.
But the way that it works is that you're judged on 5 different criteria. The first one is whether or not the picture you took is of a specific quote-unquote event Pokemon, like Pikachu on a ball, or Pikachu on a log. There's a lot of Pikachus. Or a Jigglypuff on stage, stuff like that. Those have their own built-in point values. Then there's the size, how much of the frame the Pokemon takes up. Generally, the closer that you get to the Pokemon filling the frame without being cut off by the frame, the better. The pose, which is a lot more abstract. I'm not really sure how it grades this, but it's like, it depends on like whether you're seeing the Pokemon from the front or like whether it's doing something interesting. It's definitely more of a trial and error thing. The technique, which is whether the Pokemon is in the center of the frame, which is not how photography works, Professor Oak. Learn about the rule of thirds.
And also, it's really weird about how it decides if things are in the center of the frame. I took a picture where a Meowth, it was like my highest scored picture of a Meowth. The Meowth was like doing its mocking face at me at the beginning at the beach, the one that's up above. And he basically takes up the whole left side of the photo, but his foot is extended out and in the center of the frame. And that counts.
But you know how like when you're taking photos on a camera, and this happens like in video games too. When you turn on the selfie mode, I know it's in Yakuza at least. Like it has that grid that goes over the screen that separates things into thirds. That's because in photography, there's this thing called the rule of thirds, where you want the focal points of the image to be lined up at where those lines are and where they cross over with each other. You're not supposed to put things in the dead center of the frame, Professor Oak.
Look. This is an N64 game, and I'm sure the rule of thirds will apply to new Pokémon Snap now that they'll have a real-ass AI that'll be able to judge your goddamn pictures and not just a weird algorithm that can barely run on a Nintendo 64.
But if you put your Pokemon directly in the center of the screen, then your point total is doubled. And finally, you get bonus points if there's more than one of the same Pokemon in the picture. Which is why my picture of a Charmander, where I had like 8 Charmander in frame, was generally pretty well received.
Yeah, same. I think I probably got the same advice and got the same picture of a Charmander. So, with all that being said, what was your Pokemon Report score?
My final score on the Pokemon Report was 183,390 points.
That is a good almost 10,000 points above me. I am at 175,460.
Sick.
So, obviously one of us is the better photographer, and the other cheated to get a higher score. So and I think that's a good place to end the discussion on Pokémon Snap. I don't think there's anything else we need to say.
That's a solid 40 minutes.
More than I expected. You could have gotten halfway through 100%ing Pokemon Snap in this time. So, it's time to go ahead and head on to our next game then. And boy, howdy, I'm excited for this one. Our next game is representing fighter number 67, King K. Rool. It is the 1999 N64 game, the final game of the 90s, by the way, that we will play for this show for now.
Because it took up the entire decade to finish it. Hey!
It is the 1999 Nintendo 64 game, Donkey Kong 64. I'm one of the only defenders of this game on Earth.
This is our second game from Rare.
Yes, this is our second of 3 that we will be playing for this show.
Mm-hmm. And because this came after Banjo-Kazooie, so this is their second 3D collectathon, or where was Conker in there?
It might have been the third. I think Conker was pre-DK64.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah, and so Donkey Kong 64 in a lot of ways was the precursor to Banjo-Tooie as well, in that I think they learned a couple of the wrong lessons from DK64, but also learned a couple of the right lessons from what they did wrong in DK64.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think the wrong lessons that they learned was how unreasonably big they could make some of their worlds. but the right lessons that they learned, which are things that we will become intimately familiar with in Donkey Kong 64 now, is, boy, you gotta do everything a lot of times, huh?
So I gotta interrupt you so I can say that I'm crazy wrong, because not only did Conker's Bad Fur Day come out after Donkey Kong 64, it came out after Banjo-Tooie.
Wow.
It was their last N64 game.
Well, okay then. I've never played Conker.
I've also never played Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Came out when we were a kid, and we were not allowed to play that video game.
I've always kind of meant to, but I'm also told that it does not age super great.
If I ever get an Xbox One and Rare Replay...
I absolutely adore Donkey Kong 64. It is flawed as hell. It is possibly one of the most flawed games we will play on this show. But it was my first video game. It came with my Nintendo 64 that I got for Christmas as a child. I still remember to this day my father thinking the DK wrap was a bug of some sort, so when it kept coming up, he would turn off the 64, take it out, blow on the cartridge, put it back in, but then the DK wrap would play again. And I don't know what his thought process was, but this is a very vivid memory from my childhood.
Yeah, what the fuck? Can you, ask him about that?
He would not remember. There's no way in hell he'd remember that. But I used to play it all the time. And then I didn't beat it until I was an adult, because beating this game is actually a huge pain in the ass, because you have to beat the original Donkey Kong arcade game twice.
What a video game.
Let me explain that. So in order to beat the final boss of Donkey Kong 64, this is a heads up for anybody that plans on playing alongside of us. In order to face the final boss of Donkey Kong 64, you need to have gotten a Rareware coin and a Nintendo coin. You get the Rareware coin by getting a certain score in the really retro rare game Jetpack, which is not that hard. It's actually quite easy to do it. But in order to get the Nintendo coin, you have to find a Donkey Kong arcade cabinet in the level Frantic Factory. The first time you beat the game, it will give you a golden banana. And then Squawks, the parrot, will say, but how about you try for real this time, and we make it harder. And so it does. It makes the game harder, and then you have to beat it a second time to get this item that is required to fight the final boss. It is my least favorite thing about the game, by far, 100%. And it's the entire reason why I never beat the game as a child. I did not fight the final boss of Donkey Kong 64 until I was 19 years old.
I've never finished the game because, frankly, there's too much of it.
Well, that's the other piece of advice I will give to anybody that is playing alongside of us. Do not 100% this game. Don't do it. This game is, and this is a problem with its design, this is a complete point in the favor of people that do not like this game, because at the end of the day, this is a game about collecting stuff. And the fact that the easiest way to make yourself hate this game is to try and collect all of the stuff is a bad thing. That's a misstep in design. But do not try and 100% this game. Take it from me, somebody that's already done that. Don't do it. It's not worth it. The game is not good if you try to 100% it. Just full stop. And again, this is coming from somebody that fucking loves this game.
It's a lot. Boy, howdy, it's a lot.
It is a lot. But again, I really like this game. I really like the game's soundtrack. I like most of the levels except for Gloomy Galleon, where dreams go to die. And I'm so looking forward to playing this game.
I'm frankly scared of it.
I'm gonna enjoy my time with it. It's going to take a month, I assume. How long to beat? The way we have been estimating how many sessions a game is going to take to finish is by putting in the how long to beat, and I think we divide it by 4.
3.5, round it up.
3.5, which is generally the length of our streams. How Long to Beat puts Donkey Kong 64 at about 31 hours. I don't think it will take me 31 hours to finish this game, especially if my plan is going to be, I will get the golden bananas. I need to unlock this next level and not a single one more because I'm not crazy this time. The estimated sessions it puts is 9 for this one. I do not think it is going to take us 3 months to get through Donkey Kong 64, but it's not going to be like the past 2 games have been, where it's like, play once, done.
You say it's not going to take 3.5 months, but we're preparing a bonus episode just in case it does.
But yeah, but I think it's going to take over 2 weeks. It is not going to take 3 months.
Maybe 2.
I 100% guarantee this.
We've decided that we're gonna stock up on bonus episodes for games like this, where they can take a while, but there's not really a lot worth discussing. RPGs like Final Fantasy, the story is what we can discuss in every episode. But we can't do a bunch of parts for Donkey Kong, because what's there to talk about?
Yeah, it'd just be, all the episodes would essentially just be us saying the same thing in multiple episodes. There's no point to that.
So that's why we've got bonus episodes, and I kind of expect us to use 2 on this one, not gonna lie.
I really don't think it's gonna take that long, I'll be real with you. I don't. I know this game intimately, I don't think it's gonna take that long.
If you say so.
But we'll see. You know how you were the expert on Ocarina of Time in that episode? Now granted, I don't speed run Donkey Kong 64, I don't know any of the cool tricks, but I have beaten this game several times in my life. In fact, of all the games on this list, outside of maybe Mario 64, this is probably the game I've beaten the most of any of them ever. The only way that is going to change is if Kingdom Hearts 2 gets added to this list, which, spoilers, it won't be. This is one of my favorite games of all time. I don't think it's going to take that long, but it's gonna take significantly longer than, say, Smash 64 or fucking Pokémon Snap, which we played Smash 64 for longer than we played Pokémon Snap. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I'm scared of it.
And we'll have to talk about the DK rap, which is a song that Grant Kirkhope says that he'll never live down because people at the time thought it was a serious attempt at music, and it very much was not. It's still, I think, more than any song on Earth. That man scored the entirety of Banjo-Kazooie, and the song, if there was any song that would be etched onto his grave, it would start with, "He's the leader of the bunch, you know him well."
That's depressing.
I think it's hilarious, but it's also kind of depressing. And with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. Those are all at Smashterpieces. You can follow me on Twitter at TheDebuga. You can follow Matt on Twitter at GrimaceDoMenace. I will be streaming on twitch.tv/Nintendo World Report because, like I have said in pretty much every episode for the past 3 episodes, this game is my yard, and I get this one. And people can claw it out of my cold, dead hands. I'm also the only one that likes it, so it made sense. So yeah, you can find that at twitch.tv/Nintendo World Report. I assume you will be streaming on your personal channel?
Probably.
So that is at twitch.tv/GrimaceTheMenace. You can also follow our editor, Peter Spezia, at Pete Speakeasy on Twitter. Go and give him a shout out. I do another show with him called Original Sound Chat, where we have actually done Donkey Kong 64. I brought it a year ago. It was my game for Grant Kirkhope because I wanted Banjo-Kazooie fans to be angry at me, I guess. And that's it, I believe. Smashterpieces is a production of Anonymous Dinosaur and Nintendo World Report. With that, my name is Joe.
And my name is Matt.
And we will see you next time for our discussion on Donkey Kong 64.